Oh, so if Borborygmos is named with Pithing Needle, I guess that doesn't actually stop his ability because of the way that it's worded.
Yeah, well, there are multiple Borborygmos. There's the original one that was in...
Oh, did he name the wrong one?
And that means that if we up the intensity of saltiness,
I think he might have just said Borborygmos.
a little bit of salt can make a difference. Salt does a couple of other things. It actually suppresses our sensation of bitterness.
Yeah, so it sounds like he just named Borborygmos, not Borborygmos Enraged.
Wow.
And there is another Borborygmos who is, as we know, the leader of the Gruul clan, who was originally in Guildpact, and it is legal in Modern.
Wow, extremely unfortunate. And you saw Bob Hoying's face when he won. He just...
I imagine that
he
was
kind of stole it. And
I imagine that was the judge question that Bob Hoying might have had.
That makes a lot of sense.
We learn to associate saltiness with
Borborygmos Enraged.
one of the more magical things that salt can do is
Borborygmos, wow.
All right. Okay. Should we do a podcast?
I guess.
Hello and welcome to Lucky Paper Radio. I am your host, Andy. I am here, as always, with my co-host, Anthony, navigator of dietary restrictions Maddox.
It's always a unique challenge, but it's kind of a fun little Tetris game to play when you're hosting people with different dietary restrictions. And like we always say on this podcast, constraints breed creativity. It's really powerful to just shift your context and be forced to solve new problems in different ways.
It is true. We live in a city. We have lots of friends from lots of walks of life in the city. And every event I've ever hosted, always some combination of dietary restrictions to navigate, which is fine. That's, part of hosting an event. You got to navigate people's limitations. Last summer, I went to my sister and her then fiance, now husband's, combined bachelorette party with about 20 some other people.
Isn't that just a wedding reception?
No, because they didn't get married. It was just a bachelorette party.
Okay.
Look,
that's not the important part.
I don't make
Keep going
the rules.
with your story.
The point is that, my sister lives in the suburbs. I dare say she's a little more normie than me. I don't think she would resent that characterization. We live in the city. Our friends are weirdos. Her friends aren't weirdos. They're like normal
fair.
people. Everybody works in finance. Everybody has a little suburban house or whatever. And there was like 20-some people at this event, and I was cooking for some people, and I asked, give me the dietary restrictions. And no one said anything. I asked again, like, hey, can I get dietary restrictions? Zero dietary restrictions among 20-some people, which is
20 people.
Unheard of for
Amazing.
me. Absolutely unheard of.
What'd you make?
I made a giant pot of chili.
I remember this giant chili.
Yeah. And that chili does have a lot of stuff in it, so there's a lot of boxes to tick for dietary restrictions. But for those interested, this is J. Kenji Lopez Alt's recipe for the greatest chili, which you look at the ingredients list, and it's got like bars of dark chocolate and 3 anchovies and just a little bit of Marmite and a bunch of other ingredients that you would never expect to see in chili.
Just a little bit.
And I can tell you, the tiny bit of coffee grounds. It calls for I think a tablespoon of roasted coffee grounds. And, you put it all in there, and then sure enough, I say you can taste almost all the ingredients when all is said and done. Now, most people probably don't, at least in this country, don't know what Marmite tastes like, wouldn't know to seek out that flavor, but I think it's all in there. It's really good chili. It's worth it.
Would you say it's the ultimate chili?
Sure.
I think he's backed off a little bit on his hyperbolic titles, which I appreciate.
I mean, look, it's just the media landscape we live in. He kind of has to do it. He's got books to sell and media properties to manage, so, I mean, you got to do it. It kind of stinks. Anyway, welcome to this episode of Lucky Paper, the ultimate guide to how cooking is like cubing. Right? Is that fair?
Sure. I just think that, I love Magic the Gathering. It's one of my biggest, I would say it's one of my 2 biggest hobbies that I've had for the last however many years.
Mm-hmm.
It's that and cooking. And I think that these 2 hobbies are really similar in a lot of ways. And I think that they appeal to a lot of the same people because of their sort of intrinsic similarities. And I think it'd be fun just to sort of talk about these 2 hobbies and those similarities they share.
If the feedback on our podcast is any indication, I know there are a lot of you out there that enjoy cooking, so hopefully this does check a lot of boxes for you. We had a couple episodes there that were very Andy-focused episodes where I brought my whole aggro mid-range control rant, and then there was feedback on the rant, which led to more rants, and I think people are looking for a breath of fresh air, and you are here to provide that, Anthony.
Wow. Intimidating.
You're a breath of fresh air, I would say.
Wow.
Compared to the stale air of me, so stale.
let's just say I feel like we've talked about a lot of these more concrete topics about playing the game, and I just want to talk about why I really love the game. Not just what I do to try and improve what I do to try and, design better environments, but why I love this game.
That's what we're going to do. But first, we do have a Pack One Pick One from a listener-submitted cube. This cube comes to us from listener Paolo, a.k.a. Tortured Existence on Cube Cobra. It's a 360 card, vintagey legacy cube. And Paolo kind of lays out the goals of having all 10 color pairs be viable, including some cards from all of Magic's history, playing with powerful cards, but not having all the games decided by them. So let's look at this pack and see what we can figure out about this cube, Anthony. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, the pack is Hypnotic Siren, Gonti Lord of Luxury, From Under the Floorboards, Sacred Foundry, Chromatic Lantern, Expressive Iteration, Sakura Tribe Elder, Restoration Angel, Inscription of Abundance, Wall of Omens, Daze, Villis, Broker of Blood, Counterspell, Rakdos the Showstopper, and Fable of the Mirror Breaker. All of the cards I just read are available in a visual spoiler on luckypaper.co/podcast/94/cards, where you can see those cards and also any other card we will mention over the course of this entire episode. Anthony, I gave you plenty of time. What do you think of this pack?
Couple things stand out to me in this pack. The first is Gonti Lord of Luxury, because that card is awesome. It's fun to play. Your opponents don't like to play against it, but that's fine. We've also got Counterspell, classic, powerful. That really stands out. I also think that Fable of the Mirror Breaker is an incredibly powerful red card.
This is seeing modern play right now.
I'm not surprised. I mean, I actually got to play with that at the pre-release, and that was a lot of fun. And I mean, the card just does so much. I just felt like I was cheating when I was playing with it. So I think it's between those three. I'm leaning toward actually Fable of the Mirror Breaker, because that's a card I actually haven't played in Cube specifically, and especially not in this type of cube. So I think that's where I want to start. Is that ridiculous?
I don't think it's the most powerful card in the pack, but I don't think it's ridiculous to start there. What I'm looking at here, the cards that jump out at me are actually kind of a different set of cards.
Okay.
I think the power outliers of the cards I would consider first picking are Sacred Foundry.
Yep.
Just start on a land is reasonable, though as stated in past episodes, I don't love starting on committed dual lands. A fetch land is great because it can be lots of different duals. This is exactly red-white. If I'm not playing red and white in my finished deck in some capacity, Sacred Foundry is not going to see play. So it's not as open of a pick as I would normally like. I think Sakura Tribe Elder is a very good green card.
Definitely.
If you end up playing green, and I'm always looking for good cheap cards in packs like this. The other card I'm looking at is Daze, Anthony. I think Daze is a weird, hard to evaluate card in cube context because, it's this kind of effect where if you can rely on your opponent having it, it totally changes the shape of games. We see this play out in Legacy, where you can expect 4 Dazes out of your opponent, and it completely changes the way you actually sequence your plays and whether you play into it or not. And here, there's going to be one copy in this cube. Maybe this cube also plays 4 spikes or mana tithe, something like that. But it's just a really powerful effect to be able to cast a free counterspell. And you really want to be, in my opinion, in a proactive deck to take the most advantage of Daze. You want to have a little bit of a clock, which I think mostly just forces your opponent to use their answers on schedule. They can't afford to sit back and wait a turn and play around days or whatever. And so you get to be ahead and then really capitalize on the sort of time walk effect you get from a well-timed daze where they commit their entire turn to casting something and you daze it. So I would take that before Counterspell. I'm not saying that's correct, but the decks where Daze is good are some of my favorite decks to play, and I think the ceiling on it is really high. The ceiling on Daze is one of the highest ceilings. We talked a little bit about the ceiling of Village Rights on the Cube Discord this week. We could we're going to avoid that conversation for now, but I think we can agree the free ceiling of Bounce an Island to counter a spell is pretty nutty. So I'm on one of those. I also want to give a little shout out to Expressive Iteration.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were going to mention when you said you were looking at a different set of cards.
Expressive Iteration is also, this is also making Waves of Constructed, and just it's a 2-mana draw 2 with upside, which is quite powerful. It's a gold card, though, and so
right.
I think a very splashable gold card. I would be pretty happy to splash Expressive Iteration, assuming I have the mana to do so, in let's say a teamer deck or something like that. Maybe a blue-black control deck. I splash an Expressive Iteration. I can see that happening sometimes, but it's not enough for me to commit to a gold card. If I was going to do the mono gold cards and land strategy, I'm going to start on the land here for sure. Expressive Iteration is not so good that it's one of the bombs you get paid off in for being in that gold deck.
Probably. So 2 data points, maybe we can just explore how this is a little bit different from your cube, which is I think the cube that we play most often that this is most similar to. But
Probably, though I do think it's
2
pretty different.
Yeah, but just in terms of like the bulk of where the power level lies and the kinds of strategies I expect to see supported here. 2 key differences are in your cube, you have a lot more fixing. So does the lighter
Right.
fixing, do I need to recalibrate and say, actually, taking that Sacred Foundry is a pretty high priority because it's one of only a handful of fetchable duels? The other thing that I'm looking at is, again, compared to your cube, there are a lot fewer aggressive 1-drops, especially in, white and red. So I'm wondering if the whole tempo might be a little bit slower. And that's what's making me think that Daze is not quite as high a pick, especially compared
It's
to
probably
Counterspell
not.
here.
It's probably not. Let's be real. But I do like the card. Yeah, I guess if you were to look at this list, I can't tell from looking at this pack or from evaluating this list as to what is going to be the deciding factor in games. If you think it's going to come down to value, then I do think a pick like Fable of the Mirror Breaker or Expressive Iteration or even Gonti could be very reasonable. Those are like guaranteed 2-for-1s in this pack, right?
Right.
So those could stand out above. I mean, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, it's kind of like a 3-for-1, right? I mean, you get the 2/2 token, you then get to discard a card to draw
It
2
makes
cards.
infinite treasures, so
No, sorry, you just loot. So you don't get to draw. You don't get plus cards, right? You discard up to 2 cards if you
Right,
do
right.
draw that many cards. So you're not up on cards there. You get basically 2 2/2s plus some card selection, and one of the 2/2s has the upside of having this activated ability, and another one has this treasure token. It does so much. There's
this
a lot.
card does so much.
It does a lot. So I think, one of those cards, if you think that it's going to come down to value, a Gonti, an Expressive Iteration, a Fable of the Mirror Breaker. If you think it's going to come down to tempo, then that's where you start to look at your Sakura Tribe Elders, your Dazes, your maybe counter spells, where it's a matter of countering a key spell at a key time. I don't think Fable Mirror Breaker is the strongest card here, but I think I'm in the same boat as you at the end of the day. I just want to play with this card and see what it does in an environment like this.
Yeah.
I think you've talked me into it.
Oh my. The other point for Gonti is there does seem to be a little bit of a blink theme, which, I mean, that's just like the most fun you can have in Cube, right?
I mean, some people really enjoy it, yes.
You don't want to play a Soul Herder in Gonti?
Gonti's just like, it's to me, it's like Mill, right? Some players get really tilted at Mill. And it's like, look, unless you're going to lose to it, the Mill didn't matter. There are some edge cases, right?
True.
Maybe you have Delve cards, in which case Mill was actually good for you. Maybe you had tutors, in which case the Mill was actually bad for you in some small way because now you have less things to tutor from. There's edge cases. But for the most part, people get mad at Mill that shouldn't get mad at Mill. It feels bad to them, even though it's not actually impacting the game in a commensurate way. Similarly, Gonti would be a little bit better if when it entered the battlefield, it looked at the top 5 cards of your library and put one of those cards into your hand and was just like a weird Muldriftery card with Death Touch.
Define better. I would define better as being more fun. And in that case, I think you would be actually making it worse.
I mean, more powerful is what I mean in
Sure.
this case. And because you know that the deck you drafted has cards that are on your strategy, right?
Right.
It's possible that you reveal your opponent's cards and they're a control deck and you're some mid-range deck, and now you got like your choice of counter spells that you don't ever really want to leave up because you're trying to tap out for threats every turn. You can get cards that are off plan from your opponent. In theory, Gonti shouldn't make you mad because it's just a 2-for-1 that just drew a card, right? It's kind of a really plussed up Elvish Visionary, basically.
That is a take.
But people
I
get
see what
real
you're saying.
mad
People
when you
do get
when
mad.
you, when
I
you take their spells.
Had
Real
a
mad.
Gonti Lord of Luxury deck for a commander deck with him for a little while. Not quite as spicy as some Gonti decks you've probably seen on the internet, but some people just refused to sit down at the table or stormed off after I touched their deck.
Did you ask first? You gotta
Yes.
ask.
Oh, you gotta
first
ask.
before
You can't just
before
reach
do any
across and
deck
grab
touching.
somebody's cards, of course.
So you talked me into it. I'm taking Fable Mirror Breaker and see what's what.
Hell yeah.
If you want to have your cube on Lucky Paper Radio, like Paolo here, you can send a link to it to mail@luckypaper.co with your name, and please include your pronouns so we know how to refer to you in the third person, should we choose to do so.
So the first thing I want to talk about is that I think that games are a work of art in like the most classic sense,
absolutely.
Big capital A art. And I think that food is as well. I think that we have this weird sort of cultural establishment where what is art today is just like paintings and sculptures. And to me,
Excuse me, and also animated GIFs of Sonic twerking or like some ape with a grill.
sure, fine. Well, that's actually interesting because I think that actually the reason for that, so many, like another huge critical art form is architecture, which I think we just don't really talk about as art today. And I think that's just because we talk about art basically as a commodity. It's like these are the things that rich people can buy or sell, and that's why those are the things that we've cordoned off as being art.
And if it has any other function, then it must not just be that commodity to be bought and sold. It must be a
Right.
different thing. So it's no longer art anymore because it's actually a building we can live in or a game we can play or a food we can eat.
Which is, I think, a bizarre take. So it's interesting that you bring up that you can now commodify, animated GIFs, and so we're calling them art again. Sure.
Commodifying big scare quotes there.
Yeah, it's complicated.
A commodity.
So I just think that cooking is one of the greatest and most important art forms because it is so deeply connected with our experience of life. It's not just looking at a painting on the wall, which engages in a single sense. It's the fact that you look at it, you see it, you smell it. There's potentially, you hear it if it's, something sizzling in the pan. And ultimately, you actually put it into your body. It just is so much more compelling and powerful than just, sorry, painters out there, but just looking at a painting on the wall. It's really an immersive experience. And I think that games are really similar to that. It's not just something that you look at on the wall, but you pick up a Magic card and it has this beautiful illustration. It has this textural experience of the feel of shuffling cards. It has all of this, how do you even call it, this sort of sense of interacting in a strategic way, of stretching your brain and thinking about the cards, that all amounts to this beautiful and wonderful work of art.
I agree completely. I've always felt that food and cooking is one of the most interesting, creative, and most generous acts you can do for another person, right? It is extremely intimate that you are making a thing that someone is going to consume.
Right.
Not to get weird about it, but
oh, it's weird.
maybe to
It's
get
a little bit weird.
Maybe to get a little weird about it, but you think about other things that are considered intimate between friends or whatever, and nothing touches the trust that comes from you prepared a meal and I'm going to consume it now. I've always found that people that don't like foods, the depth, the profundity of their dislike for a food is often very pronounced, because not liking a food is a full body visceral experience. If you find the taste disgusting or the texture terrible, you with okra or bananas or whatever, you hate it. Or if it's a book you don't like or a movie, you're yeah, sure, I don't like the movie. Some people will get performatively upset about other art they don't like because it's fun to get riled up. But if you love a food or if you hate a food, it's a much more full body, profound experience, because it's either gross or it's heavenly in a way that I don't think visual arts can really be. And you and I have both had long lives as practicing visual artists and non-practicing visual artists. We love visual art too, but I think cooking is on a whole different plane.
The other thing that you just touched on there is bringing people together, which I think that as a form of art, both games and cooking do in a way that, again, visual art just doesn't have the capacity to do in the same way, where when you're cooking a meal, when you're building a cube, the whole sort of performance of that work of art is to bring people together, to sit down at a table and break bread and crack packs. And that is just one of the most phenomenal things that I love about both of these.
I'm getting so many good ideas for Lucky Paper playmats. Well, it says break bread, crack packs.
I love that. That's great.
That would be very, very good.
And we've talked at length about sort of digital Magic and how we were both excited and optimistic about it. It's we love Magic. You want to just be able to play a lot more Magic and have access to it all the time. I thought, yes, absolutely. Give it to me. I'm so excited for Arena. And then we started
Arena coming to Mac.
The carrot was dangling for a long time.
Yeah.
And then we started playing and it was just this actually doesn't, the itch that I thought Magic was scratching is not what I thought it was. It's not just this act of, looking at the cool illustrations and shuffling the cards. Well, you don't even get the shuffling. You don't get the multi-sensory experience with digital Magic. And you also don't get the experience of bringing people together.
I mean, I think there are definitely, we played digitally over the pandemic before we had vaccines and we were still on lockdowns because there was no other alternative. And that was certainly way, way worse, but there was still some element of coming together. We got to play with some of our friends
That's
we
true.
Don't get to see in person, over voice chat or whatever in Discord. And so I don't want to completely minimize that, but obviously
you're totally right. And the fact that we actually started this podcast in many ways because we felt that sort of loss of connection to people at the beginning of the pandemic. So, and it's been awesome that this has started, we've started actually meeting people in the community and meeting people digitally. So I think you're totally right. And that's maybe I was a little bit too stark, but
no. I mean, to be clear, I totally agree with you though, right? I see people talking about how Magic is primarily a video game now. And certainly if you were to, I'm assuming, look at the profits from Arena or the resources that Magic spends on working on their digital forms of Magic, both on Magic Online and Arena. Like, it is, from a business standpoint, probably very much largely a video game. I know a lot of people, even in our local area. I think I've said this on the show before. I have a neighbor, a person that lives in my neighborhood, just like a 2-minute walk from my house. That's like my age. And when they moved to the neighborhood, we were like working on like introducing them to people. Like, it was kind of like, that early stage of like feeling out whether or not this is going to be like a friendship. And it turned out that this guy played Magic and loved Magic. And I was like, oh, this is definitely going to be a friendship. like, you have no idea how much I love Magic. It's going to be great. You ever played a cube? Let's play this cube or whatever. And I invited him to a bunch of things, and he just never showed up. He's like, always busy or flaky, or just didn't want to come and didn't want to tell me to stop inviting him to stuff. I invited him to so many things, and I think eventually he came to like one pre-release, but then nothing else. And I just stopped inviting him because it obviously wasn't going to happen. I still see him walking his dogs every once in a while, and this guy plays Arena like every day. He's like still loves Magic, still plays tons of Arena, and I can't get him to come out of his house and play physical Magic with me. And I always think about him when it's like, this game is completely different things to us, right? Like,
right.
It may seem like we have a shared interest, and maybe at some level we both like games or something, because you and I both like non-Magic games as well. I like video games sometimes. I mean, you still play Animal Crossing every day. Don't tell me you don't like.
Is that
games.
a game even?
Absolutely. You're gonna play the gatekeeping games now and say that Animal Crossing is not a game.
You're right. That's I'll fight that.
People are gonna be sliding into your Menchies. So it's interesting that like his experience of Magic is like it's his downtime. He plays for 25 minutes or a half hour, 45 minutes before bed every night or something. The way it fits into his life is like totally, completely different than the way it fits into my life. And as a result, he gets something totally different out of it, right? Maybe he doesn't want the like anxiety of a social experience. He just wants like the brain fog, chill out, unplug of just, going on Arena and grinding some limited or whatever. We've always known that Magic is so many things to so many different people, but like that to me really drives home how different it is. Because for me, Magic is what I do to socialize as an adult. I also have like, neighbors and stuff. I have other friends that don't play Magic, right? But the conscious effort I make to meet people, to see people outside of my immediate social networks, to like socialize, I chose to be through Magic. I'm not a big drinker. I don't want to go to bars personally and like do bar hopping or whatever. And there's lots of other ways you can do this, right? People have clubs, people join gyms, whatever. Magic for me is like how I want to meet people and socialize as an adult. And like that's what the game is largely for me. And similarly, like I agree that food occupies a similar space where if I'm getting together with my friends, I don't want to get together and go to a bar, even in pre-pandemic times, right? I don't want to go to a restaurant either, to be perfectly honest, very often. But I love cooking for people and having like a small group of people over and having a little dinner party. That's like my ideal kind of socializing.
And if you can just combine that with Magic, do them both at once. I really think that is such a testament to the game. Like, I agree that those sort of, like you're saying, sort of tune out and grind games on Arena is not what it is to me. It's not what's valuable to me, but the fact that the game is so deep and has so many facets and
that it can be that.
It can also
and
be
also
that
what it
while
is
at
to
the
us,
same
yeah.
time. And yeah, that's just so amazing. And similarly to food, it's like some people love...
Some people want to have their meals delivered in a pill form.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking I listen to the Doughboys a lot because I don't know why. It's not really a podcast about food at
There's
all.
There's a lot of people that don't know why they listen to the Doughboys, me among them. I introduced it to you, and I don't really know why I listen.
But they just have... one of the aspects that is interesting is how it's just such a different approach to food, where I don't want to go to Taco Bell at all, except sometimes a little bit after I listen to Doughboys. Sometimes I never go to Taco Bell, but it's interesting just to hear about people that have such a different experience with food.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but ultimately I think the Doughboys podcast is like any good podcast, which is that it's about the people and their relationship to each other and their social network that they bring onto the show. They could be talking about anything, and it would probably be just as good of a show as far as I'm concerned, because I'm not eating fast food either for the most part, and so the subject matter is irrelevant. But maybe I'll take that back a little bit. I think the fact that food is, to your point, like such a evocative, impactful thing, like such a confronting thing, the way like the food you eat is so running out of...
it's also
my
a
little brain
universal...
source is not working. It's universal, but it's also
a shared experience. It's really hard to maintain like long distance friendships and communicate with people when you don't have a shared baseline. And the fact that they're like, hey, we're just talking about the most mundane, the most like national chains that everybody has access to, has some baseline for relating to what does a hamburger taste like.
Anybody can play the game. What are the 4 sausages on your Mount Sausagemore? Anybody can play that game. No, but I genuinely think that the nature of the conversation being directed by the experience of eating, which is like I guess if you listen to other like podcasts that are about media criticism, I often have the feeling that like people are hamming it up, right? When you listen to somebody on the Doughboys that hated their meal, you can tell like that was disgusting for them. They did not like that at all, or they were really into that fish fillet sandwich or whatever. I did not expect to talk about the Doughboys so much, but
Here we are.
I mean, that's food, right? That's the great universal thing that food is.
I'm gonna ask you later about what's on your Mount Sausage more.
Okay, I'm gonna make the list now so I don't forget.
So the next thing that I love about both these hobbies is I think they are both, I mean, maybe it's sort of implicit in saying that I think they are both art forms, but they are just both creative experiences. They are opportunities for personal creative expression, whether that's, taking a set of ingredients and combining them into some new dish that you're riffing off of some recipe you used previously, or inventing something from scratch just inspired by what's left in your fridge, or taking the ingredients of a bunch of bulk junk cards that you have in your basement and you want to throw them into a cube and try and emphasize certain aspects of the game and certain kinds of play styles. So I think we can both think about Magic as an art form practiced by, the people at Wizards of the Coast that are designing the cards. But I think it's also an art form for people that are, building their commander decks that they are passionate, excited about, and building their cubes and brewing new spicy modern decks, or, whatever else people are doing with these Magic cards.
The risk of derailing this whole podcast.
Oh, don't worry.
Can I
we
ask
could do
you
that.
to just, you're defining these things as art, which I don't object to. For the purposes of the listener, like what does that mean to you? What does it mean to describe something as an art form? Like, I'm trying to ask you for your definition of art without saying, Anthony, please define art. But like, what is the utility of describing designing a Magic deck as an art form to you? Like, what is gained from that?
So that's an exhausting question. We went to art school and
Shut up.
The is this art with a capital A or not conversation was a big topic that came up again and again. And honestly, at the end of 4 years of art school, which was a great, wonderful time that I loved, that particular question I was just completely exhausted of. It just sort of felt meaningless. It just crumbles apart as soon as you start trying to analyze it too much. But I think what is fundamental about that distinction of is it art or not was really just a question of a value judgment. Do you think that this is important as a creative pursuit to label as something high and worth considering and valuing?
Mm-hmm.
So that's really the core of what I mean is obviously they are creative pursuits, and additionally they are creative pursuits that I think we need to just be aware of and appreciate and value.
I like that definition. Very
Thanks.
nice. And obviously I agree that designing cubes, Magic decks, or whatever is a creative expression. And if you want to call that art, great. I don't think most people would think of themselves as artists if they're like designing decks, but
Well, I mean, artist is a profession. I think that you can just be a person doing art.
is it?
Oh, okay, you're right. That's a can of worms. Let's just put the lid back on that.
I honestly would say the opposite. I would say that like an artist is not a profession at all. Like if you identify someone that makes art, and then you're an artist, and whether you pay your mortgage or your rent from that is irrelevant to me. I don't care
That's
about
fair.
that at all. Also, profession has this like sense of progression. There's a beginning and a middle and an end, and like art is not that at all. You do it, and if you can make money, great. You're very lucky.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I feel similarly actually to how I feel about science, where it's like I am not a scientist, but I do try and like in a very literal way practice science in my everyday life often. And so like I
I'm
think
just
that
picturing you like pouring some boiling water on something and being like, yep, it's hot and wet now, or setting something on fire and being like, sure did burn.
I mean, it's more like if I'm writing code and things break, it's like, okay, here's a mystery. I can't observe these bits directly. Let's come up with a hypothesis. Let's come up with an experiment. Let's figure out how to understand the system which can't be observed directly. And that's what science is. And I think that's a powerful thought technology, as is just people being practicing art in their own everyday lives, even if, to your point, it's not their profession or even a main focus of their hobbies or interests. So the next thing that I think is interesting and comparable between these two hobbies is the fact that they give you this just interesting balance of both leveraging your creative expression, but also experiencing the sort of past history and accumulation of knowledge, whether that's following recipes or tapping into what are the winning decks on the latest tournament or whatever it is. Balancing that relationship of how do you navigate this space of trodden, well-known territory and moving in new directions and expressing yourself is, I think, really similar between these two hobbies.
I agree. And I think it's interesting that, the recipe analogy is really poignant for me because I don't use recipes that much when I'm cooking. Usually when I'm looking for a recipe, what I'm looking for is like, I haven't made this thing very much or I haven't made it at all, and I would like the canonical recipe, right? Like,
Which is the thing that frustrates me most about the internet is it gets harder and
it's
harder to
basically
find the
impossible to
canonical
find that.
recipe.
but you start looking for like, all right, well, what is like the lasagna recipe? Like nothing fancy, no creative takes. I don't want anybody's like variation of it. I want to know like if you averaged all of the lasagna recipes, like what's the mean or the median lasagna recipe, right? What is the one that has the like most fundamental pieces and it's just like the starting point from which lasagna branches off. And of course, this does not exist for any
Right.
dish,
It's not like
right?
there was this moment where food and cooking was in this pristine form and it's like everything was settled and the traditional recipes were all fixed.
Yeah.
And then things have, turned into variations from then. It's always been an evolving cycle.
Well, not even just that. I feel like it's always been this kind of amorphous idea, right? Within a certain range, you know it when you see it. Like, is that a lasagna or is that a casserole? Like, you can like negotiate these little points, but that to me is exactly the same as like we talked about the macro archetypes of like magic decks or like what a reanimator deck is and how it should work. And like that it, to me exists in that exact same format where like there is no canonical whatever. There's just these patterns people have observed over time where it's like, this is a similar thing, right? This dish is similar to that other dish. It's kind of like a lasagna. Can we just call it lasagna? Maybe, maybe not. And maybe lasagna is not a great example.
Can
but
we call lasagna as another playmat design?
Sure. What's important about all of these things is like what, we invent the term to ease communication, right? A new named dish comes about in the course of human history, of cooking history, because it was useful for communication to pass this dish down to some, or to express its difference and like nuanced uniqueness from other similar dishes, right?
Right. It's really hard to, it's a lot of words to explain a lasagna, but once you have the thought technology, then you can leverage that. How do I work linguistic relativity into this sentence?
Just say it and then go.
Linguistic relativity, you have that ability to say, oh, it's a whatever lasagna. And now it's so much more easy to think about and talk about and communicate that recipe.
Right. And maybe a better example is like, you think of like pizza, right?
I'm thinking about pizza.
We shouldn't, I said before we recorded that I was hungry because I didn't eat lunch today. And normally I would be fine doing a whole podcast. I'm on a little bit of an empty stomach, but I forgot we were talking literally about food the entire time. Let's say you got pizza, right? Pizza is a pretty broad category. We can probably mostly agree that a canonical pizza is like something margarita adjacent, tomato sauce, mozzarella, but whatever. But people might disagree about
Careful.
that. And it might slide into the mention. My point is that there isn't really a canonical pizza. And then you have like, all right, white pizza. White pizza versus a flatbread versus a cheesy bread, right? These distinctions where these blurry lines and like, is it worth arguing about what's a flatbread and what's a white pizza? Or is it that these terms all pop up because they have some utility and actually negotiating the finer points of their pedantic detail is not productive? It's like you're not using the words for the way they're intended. They're intended to communicate an idea. They do that effectively, trying to like turn it into, as you've said in the past, a comprehensive
And mutually exclusive set of descriptors.
Yeah, trying to make it comprehensive and mutually exclusive where like these are parallel categories and everything is one and only one of these things is not what the system was invented to be.
Right. I mean, the system wasn't even invented. It's not like someone sat down and said, here's all the categories. It's just like you're saying.
Well, now we're getting to the definition of invention.
There was a need for this term because we needed to describe something. And so it came about in pieces and has evolved. And I'm going to try not to be pedantic about flatbread, which as you're thinking of it, I'm going to do it, is really just an invention of like Applebee's and stuff, having sort of a thing where they can sell pizza, but as an appetizer. Because
you think Applebee's invented flatbread?
In that way of describing it, I mean, yeah, they sort of invented this way of talking about a pizza light. Because previously, what would flatbread be but like, pita and chapati and all the, injera, naan, all these other kinds of bread that are flatbreads. I've been listening to a lot of food podcasts. I'm sorry. Flatbreads.
You're saying putting anything on top of the bread that is not just bread is an invention of the fast casual TGI Fridays adjacent restaurant.
Sort of. I think that specific thing that I'm picturing, at least.
What about garlic bread?
I love garlic bread.
That wasn't the question.
All right, let's not just keep naming foods. I think you're totally right, and I think that parallel is just very strong and very powerful, where decks themselves are sort of ephemeral combinations of ingredients. You combine a certain set of cards, it becomes a deck, and we have all these emergent properties that we can talk about the way the deck plays, what its strategy is. But a new card gets printed, and next year the deck is going to be a little bit different. And so you're just going to have this continually evolving set of recipes for how to build a deck. And those terms that we use are portable and flexible and powerful, but they are still just sort of grasping at trying to give us ways to talk about a complex and ephemeral and constantly evolving system.
There's also this element, I'm kind of obsessed with this metaphor now. There's also this element of, a deck list is kind of like a recipe, or at least the ingredients of a recipe.
It's now, I'm just calling them recipes now from this point.
Well, but I feel like the other component of that is how you play it, right?
Yeah,
and
you gotta have the right technique.
You get the list of ingredients, or you got the actual deck list, but if you don't sequence things properly, or don't understand the matchups that particular deck has, or how it's meant to function, then you could essentially create a completely different dish, right? Like you play a game and it's like, well, this deck's no good. And it's like, well, you just didn't do it right? Even though you had the same deck list as somebody else, which colors how people think about talking about Magic.
Totally. And that idea of just saying, okay, well, if you know how to follow a recipe, you can...
so now it's like, wait, you ever seen the dumb... I watch a little bit of cooking stuff on YouTube, which I know some people think I'm like cringy or whatever. It's not authentic. I don't care. There's this interesting series by, I forget which website does this, where they have some like Michelin-starred chef that has a fancy version of like an iconic meal, and then they have a home cook that they get from whatever collection of home cooks they have access to. And they basically say, all right, well, home cook, you're now going to make this famous chef's version of fried rice, and then this famous chef is going to take your ingredients and try and make a home-cooked fried rice based on your recipe. It's interesting to see what a really, really good chef can do with the same basic ingredients that a home cook would not think to do, where it's like, all right, you've got your like shrimp shells here, and actually I'm going to make a like light shrimp broth out of these shells, where you were just going to like shell them and then, pan fry these shrimp and put it on top of your fried rice. And to me, that's kind of like looking at LSV draft the Magic Online cube and being like, oh, well, whatever you hand LSV, he's one of the best Magic players that ever lived. He's going to be able to play reasonably competently with it and make a lot of things look really good. When in actuality, like, is that the best ingredients? Is that the best deck list, the best recipe? Maybe not, but you have a really good pilot there. Similar kind of relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I was worried we were just pushing the metaphor too far.
I think we're definitely doing that, yeah.
I actually just think we're in the territory where this is no longer a metaphor. This is just true about how we approach stuff. And the fact that if you're looking at a recipe or a set of cards, if you just know this is the recipe and this is the deck list, that only gets you so far. If you actually know, why do these ingredients go together? What is the technique for putting them together? And why do these cards go together? What is the strategy for making them work? Then when a new card gets printed, you know how to fold that in and change your recipe, or you know how to have a new sideboard strategy. Like actually understanding the why and being both an intuitive cook and an intuitive deck builder and player are like that. That's how you actually become a powerful wizard.
I'm stealing this directly from Drew, who's a listener to the show and a member of the Discord. Drew, when we were talking about something a while ago, we struggled to describe this show because other shows, other Magic podcasts have very specific focus where it's like, this is...
We struggle to have a specific focus is what you're trying to say.
I think you and I both like to be generalists and like to not box ourselves in terms of the considerations we're allowed to have or whatever. So some Magic podcasts are like, we are the Commander podcast. We talk about Commander every single week. Or like, we're the Modern podcast. We're going to go over the Modern metagame and talk about Modern deck lists. Like, and to me, that's like a much better show concept because they have a very specific focus. And we talk largely about Cube, but intentionally not entirely about Cube. Anyway, Drew put it best once when Drew said that his goal as a player, which I think we were talking about the nuances of like whether you were a spike or not. And Drew was like, I don't know, I'm probably considered a spike, but like my goal is not winning. My goal is understanding the game. Everything I do in Magic is about wanting to understand the game. And yes, if you understand the game better, you should probably win a little bit more. And so those things are highly correlated. But a spike would say, I'm going to grind this one matchup because I know it's going to be a big matchup for this weekend coming up because I just want to get better at this specific matchup, right? Or like grind Arena because playing more Magic makes you better at playing Magic, it turns out. That's how you just get better at it. Whereas if your goal is understanding the game, then those cost-benefit analysis are like totally different. Like to me, it's not worth grinding Arena, which I don't enjoy and don't have fun doing, to understand the game marginally better in that specific way, when I could be talking about it with my friends, playing Cube, doing whatever I do in the Magic sphere that is about understanding the game. And so that is what I value. That is what I pursue in Magic, is I want to understand this game completely. And that means watching a little bit of Constructed, playing some Limited, and like kind of touching all of these spheres, but just trying to get a big picture. And that's the same way I approach cooking. I know you approach cooking. I hate following recipes because I don't want to just like have a series of instructions I follow and then a dish pops out at the end. I want to understand why the recipe is that way. And most recipes are not written in a way to like teach you how to cook, right? I want to know how to cook. I don't want to just know how to follow instructions.
Right. I think that those two modes you're describing are obviously both valid ways to approach the game, and I think they are just different sort of variations of this spike mentality. But for me, I'm totally on the same page where it's like, oh, figuring out how to solve a Rubik's Cube once would be fun, but once I've done that, like once I've done that work and I've solved the problem, just solving a bunch of Rubik's Cubes, that doesn't really have any appeal for me. It's like once you solve it, it's done. Move on to another hobby.
If I ever beat threes, I'd probably stop playing threes, but I'm so far from beating that game.
One day. So the last point I had is I want to invoke my hero, Harold McGee, writer of On Food and Cooking, which is just one of the most incredible books. Have you read this book? Of course not. No reasonable person would read this book.
This is much closer to a book I would read than one of the fiction books you've recommended.
Okay,
and
fair.
I have referenced it occasionally. I've not read it back to back like I think you have, cover to cover.
I have read it cover to cover, which is, I don't know if I would say I recommend it, but it's just one of the most amazing things that I think any human being has created. What the book is it's a discussion of food and cooking, but in this like wonderful way where he just talks about all of these topics and how everything relates and connects to each other. So it kind of is like a textbook, but from that entry point of talking about food, he'll talk about the agricultural systems. He'll talk about the chemistry and the biology and why the Maillard reaction works the way it does and where different kinds of fruits come from and how they evolved in different contexts for different reasons. And that sort of power of food to be an entry point to connect us to learning about the sciences and learning about humanity and our social structures and the way we produce the stuff we need is so powerful and compelling to me. And I feel like all of that can happen in Magic too, even if we don't have this one tome that sort of ties together a lot of these topics.
Until you write it, Anthony.
Until someone writes it. I think that Magic for me has been an entry point in similar ways to so many interesting topics. Obviously, we've talked about just the human aspect and how it connects us to people, but we also see so many cool other projects happening where it's maybe people getting more connected to art and, you know, the worlds of illustration and these kinds of creative pursuits. We also see all these cool projects like 17 Lands doing all this intense data analysis and Ryan Sachs building draft bots that are trying to, you know, figure out if they can solve the game from this AI perspective. I know we've been a little bit critical in some ways about 17 Lands, but I feel like while as a player, I'm not that interested in it, as a person who's interested in people making stuff, of course, like that's an awesome pursuit to say, can we actually just solve this problem in a different way? Can we actually use this as a reason to start learning about more stuff? And that's just an awesome part about this game.
I feel like we need to give a shout out here to Sam from Ristic Studies, which is
absolutely
everybody's most beloved Magic YouTube channel because his videos are incredibly well researched and produced, and he's got a real talent for putting a video together. But Sam, I think, is another great exemplar of what we strive to do, which is using Magic as a lens to look at the world in general, right? And all of his videos are about Magic cards, ostensibly, but really they're about something else completely. It's about some aspect of art history. It's about some aspect of storytelling. It's about our relationship to these physical goods and commodities and how we treasure them and what makes a card valuable. It's about all these things that are so much bigger than just the game itself. Or, you know, depending how you define it, maybe the game is that big, right? It's just that people tend to narrow cast it as just a thing with game pieces on a table where there's a winner and loser when it's actually a lot more.
It's hard to understate just how much I really do love this game and how this hobby has been possible to have this longevity because of the ways that it is just connected to so many other topics and can serve as an entry point to so many other activities.
We can cut this if you want. But I think this is a good opportunity maybe to just speak on one little detail, which is that I also love this game. I love this game a lot. For at least me, I don't want people to confuse my love of this game with a love for Wizards of the Coast, which is a for-profit company whose goal is to make money for its shareholders. And there's a lot of aspects of being deeply invested in Magic that I think are a little bit, cringy is not a great term, but to have your personality defined by what is ultimately like a product is something I'm very conscious of. And I do not in any way admire Wizards. Well, I do kind of admire them. I don't in any way like put Wizards of the Coast on a pedestal and think that Wizards of the Coast is this great thing. This is a company that makes a game. They kind of struck gold. They got a great game system, and they've been working to stretch it as much as they can for the past 25 plus years and like turn it into a business. I love the game. I love the game a lot. And Wizards is this necessary thing that produces the game and makes it possible to play and prints all these cards and stuff. But I don't want people to confuse those things, because I don't love it in the way that, somebody makes, well, I guess I'm trying to think of other things. Like people that love other things, other cultural properties and media properties probably care a lot about it in a much deeper, profound way too. But there is a distinction there where it's like, I don't love the cards. I don't love the product. I love the game and all of the more abstract impacts it has on our lives that we've talked about in this episode.
It's a little bit of a difficult topic to navigate. I think I do agree to you. I think,
or it's pretty simple. Games good, companies bad. Companies are always bad. Games are always good.
as a phenomenon, an entity unto themselves, there's a lot of problems there. But companies are also made of people. I think that the people that are designing the cards, the people that are illustrating the cards, I mean, even the people that are designing the packaging for the cards, like these are all creative people, and I value them and I value the work that they do. I think part of what you're saying is also like, there is this layer of kind of gross corporateness, capitalistic nature to the game. And we don't want to say like, oh, value someone because they have an expensive Magic card. It's like, well, if you just could afford to, anybody can go buy an expensive Magic card. That's not an important part of your identity. The thing that we should be valuing is the creative efforts that everybody brings to the game, and saying, this is a deck that you designed, or this is the fact that you had this idea to collect all these beaten up old cards and make this really special, unique deck. We should value those creative moments of all the people that are playing this game with us above anything else.
I guess what I'm saying is a very cynical take would be, and we're kind of absolved of this because we make no money from this show. Well, let's say we had a sponsor or something, and a very cynical take would be like, well, you'd make a show about how great this game is because it benefits you, right? And you could look at lots of content creators around the ecosystem and say that, well, you're doing this because you have to put out a video twice a week for your sponsorships, for you hit your YouTube quotas to, have enough viewers to like maintain your thing.
That is the cynical take.
And it's very cynical. And honestly, like I in reality, I think almost everybody has like a combination of these considerations in their head, right? Anybody that is making a living on Magic, or Magic is such a big part of their life that it's like become that substantial to their like existence. There's a give and take in both ways, right? But, for me, it's so important to like have that be clear that like, I don't care about this thing as a product. I don't care to help Wizards of the Coast sell more packs. I just care about this game and how great it is. I want it to continue to exist. Like and to your point, it is a weird needle thread, because I do appreciate and value all the people that are making the game. I think the people are good. It's just like, it's this system, this abstract idea of a company and a brand that brings all of these other associations and shareholders and stuff that I don't like. But yeah, it's a weird distinction, but I wanted to touch on it because this whole episode talking about how great Magic is. I don't want it to be perceived as like shilling for some game because it's a cool product.
I guess maybe to extract some of the less cynical aspects from that, value that creativity, value the community that's being created. And if Magic disappeared tomorrow, you still have all that knowledge. In the same way we can talk about the way that you approach cooking as, recipes, and talk about the language and how it is a framework for talking about something ephemeral. That is portable knowledge. And if Magic disappeared tomorrow, you can take all those really positive aspects and actually just disentangle them from this one specific unique product and apply those to other hobbies and other experiences.
Which, to bring it back to the topic at hand, I think is a huge advantage cooking has over Magic, which is that it is completely decentralized. There is no central cooking grand poobah that has to keep existing for cooking to continue to be a thing. Everyone's got their own little islands of cooking media, writing books and making videos and, just doing it, producing cookbooks and recipes and stuff. We do have a centralized thing, and that is a thing I'm aware of, and I do see as a like weird cost to this hobby that I am not blind to. Do you have your Mount Sausage more ready to go? I've been making my list and adjusting as we've been talking. Every time you thought I was Googling something or like making a note about what you were talking about, I was just reordering my sausages. I'll go first while you think about your Mount Sausage more. Number one for me, gotta say, it's kind of a normie answer. All beef hot dog. Hot dogs are great. And I'm not going to have a Mount Sausage more without hot dogs on it. You're making a face.
I'm thinking about sausages.
Okay, that's my number one. My number two, chorizo. I love chorizo. I think it's important to have some spicy sausage in the mix.
Chorizo is important.
I think it's important to have some spicy sausage in the mix, and I feel like the application of chorizo is used in very different ways. From oh crap! I realized I forgot bratwurst. Oh, boy, chorizo and bratwurst. I'm fighting for that last. It's gonna be chorizo and bratwurst. I'm gonna come back to that one. My third slot, andouille. I love andouille sausage. That smoky flavor goes in a lot of great dishes. Little jambalayas, little stuff like that. Really into that. My fourth one, Anthony, maybe a little bit out of left field, but very important to me. I'm throwing pepperoni up as my fourth sausage on Mount Sausage.
Okay, I was
More.
going to ask, are we doing cured sausages as well? Because that's
it's all sausages.
Wow.
It's all sausages. I think it's all sausages. So I'm doing pepperoni. I'm going to go back. I'm going to get rid of that chorizo. It's got to go. I feel like chorizo and andouille, I mean, obviously they're very different, but they're both a more flavored, spiced sausage. I got to get brats in there. So it's going to be all beef hot dog, bratwurst, andouille, pepperoni. Final answer. That is my Mount Sausage More.
Well, I'm not going to give you a final answer. I'm going to reserve the right to change this whenever I want.
That's not the point of the Mount
You know
X
what?
More exercise.
It's carved in stone, and you can carve it again. You just have a smaller mountain. So my number one's going to be German or Swiss Weisswurst. This isn't the most all-purpose sausage, but it's just I have such nostalgia. It was like one of my favorite things growing up that we would have. You serve that with some crusty bread and some really spicy mustard. That is just like, I could never give that up. It's one of my favorite things. And I almost never have it, actually.
Yeah, I was about
it's
to say,
really
like,
hard to find it, but...
We don't have much around here.
Andouille's a good call. I definitely want some kind of smoky sausage that's good for flavoring a pot of beans or something like that. So I'm going to go with kielbasa, which also I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly. I'm so sorry. But andouille, I think, serves a similar role, something like that.
That's the same space.
You cut chorizo?
I cut chorizo.
I'm keeping chorizo.
Okay.
I need something spicy. And the last, I'm going to also follow you a little bit, but say my number one hard sausage is going to be a Genoa salami.
I hear that. I gotta be honest. I like the hard sausages.
It's such a big world of cured meats, and I
It's a big world, but I'm gonna say something you're not gonna like.
a
lot of them just taste kind of similar to me.
I mean, sure, a lot of them have similar ingredients.
Yeah, it's just meat and salt basically. But pepperoni, because of its role on pizza, is so important to me. I don't want a salami on my pizza.
I would put any kind of cured meat on a sausage.
You
I mean, on a
Too
pizza.
bad. That's recorded.
Pizza?
That's on Mount Sausage More for all time. I also occasionally we'll have pepperoni in the house because we had it because we were making pizza, and I just can't help myself but stop and eat little pepperoni snacks.
Every time you walk through the
every
kitchen?
time I walk past the refrigerator, well, I gotta have 3 or 4 pepperoni. I mean, why not? When I was a kid, one of my this is not good. One of my favorite little snacks to make myself would just be take a paper towel and a plate and just lay out pepperoni on it and stick it in the microwave. Go right in the microwave. It's good though. I mean, I would eat it right now.
Pepperoni.
Hot-a-roni. So, Anthony, is the moral of this story that everyone listening that likes magic for the reasons you stated should try cooking more, and that everyone that enjoys cooking should try and design their own cube and start hosting magic nights?
I don't know if that's the moral. I think that people should, not force themselves into a hobby that they're not interested in. But I think that whatever your hobby is, think about what it is that you value in it. And yeah, okay, fine. You should just cook and play more Magic.
Here's something I'll say about cooking that I really like about it is I find there is something... I hesitate to say the word meditative because I don't meditate by any stretch. I know that word has very specific meanings for specific people. There's something very peaceful and intentional for me about taking a lot of care to the parts of your life that are like the things that keep you alive, right? Like you have to eat. And so that's going to happen every day.
And you have to play games.
Not quite as much. I mean, I kind of do actually. I might lose my mind if I couldn't play games. You got to eat, you got to sleep, you got whatever. I feel like having a little bit of ritual, a little bit of care to those things really enhances my life, at least. I like those things being meaningful and not just being the gray matter that makes up life. And in between, you get to do the things you like. I like making those things the things you like,
I thought you were going to say meditative, like it's nice to just sit down and have the work part where you're just like, I got to chop all these vegetables. And sometimes you just got to sleeve this whole cube. And there's that moment
I
of
do like that too, yeah.
Getting in the flow of it.
We both are very lucky to have like creative jobs, right? Where we do somewhat creative work for our careers and we're not doing repetitive tasks as many people are forced to do for their jobs. And I find that because it's not part of my job, when I get an opportunity to do something repetitive, it's actually kind of like really great, and I kind of love it. I'm sure I would hate it if I had to do it for my job every day, but you know, when it's the exception, not the rule, it's really nice to be like, you know what I got to do? The same thing over and over again for 45 minutes, whatever it is. It's just very satisfying to me. All right, well, now I'm really hungry, so we got to end this episode so I can go home.
What are you making for dinner?
I don't know. I got to see. We're kind of low on groceries because we're going out of town soon, and I'm going out of town. So I got to figure it out. I know at the very least, we talk about all this cooking. My answer, what I might just have for dinner.
Hot dog?
I wish I had hot dogs at home. What we do have is some fish fillets. I might just have some fish.
Okay.
So that's the thing. Anyway, I got to go home and eat food right now because I'm freaking out. 25 weeks to CubeCon, Anthony. The countdown continues.
I'm still excited.
MTGCubeCon.com.
One week more excited.
Check that out, and maybe we'll see you in Wisconsin. That's it for this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This podcast is produced by me telling Anthony like a week ago, hey man, you got to come up with with a podcast topic that is very Anthony focused because everyone's tired of hearing my BS. Thanks for coming up with this topic, Anthony.
Thanks for letting me talk about food for a while.
You can talk about whatever you want. I don't care. I'm a generalist.
I'm going to turn this into a Harold McGee appreciation podcast.